Form follows function was meant to bring clarity and progress to modern architecture. Instead, it often gave us rigid cities. The problem wasn't function itself, but how narrowly it was defined, reduced to efficiency and control, while human life, ecology, and complexity were pushed aside. Sullivan said, "Whether it be the sweeping eagle in his flight, or the open apple blossom, the toiling workhorse, the blithe swan, the branching oak, the winding stream at its base, the drifting clouds, over all the coursing sun, form ever follows function. And this is the law. Where function does not change, form does not change. It is the pervading law of all things organic and inorganic, of all things physical and metaphysical, of all things human and all things superhuman, of all true manifestations of the head, of the heart, of the soul, that the life is recognizable in its expression, that form ever follows function. This is the law." Sullivan, called the father of the skyscraper and the father of modernism, was a leading figure of the Chicago school and helped create the modern steel-framed skyscraper at the moment when new technology, new money, and new ideas were transforming American cities. To him, the building's program, who uses it and for what, should shape its design. Sullivan believed architecture should be modern, rational, and truly American, rather than borrowed from European traditions. It was form follows function as opposed to form follows precedent. The spirit of democracy is a function-seeking expression in organized social form. Therefore, arrange your architecture for democracy, not for feudalism. Gird up your heart. Sullivan believed architecture could create democratic spaces, using Chicago as a laboratory for his ideas. The city of the future would be purely functional. Architecture would stop signaling social status and instead focus on efficient space and honesty of purpose. Buildings would be stripped of unnecessary decoration and designed with clean lines, symbolizing a modern campaign against dirt, darkness, and disease. Charles Dickens offers some of the most vivid literary portraits of the 19th century industrial city, the chaos and social disorder that modernist architects were reacting against. In Hard Times, he describes Coketown as a bleak industrial landscape, a place of endless factory chimneys, polluted air, and identical rows of workers' houses. The city feels dehumanizing, as if people have become extensions of the machines they work with. Inspired by speed, technology, industry, and war, modernists imagined a city of light, embracing transparency, made from metal, glass, steel, and exposed wiring, giving even massive structures an unexpected sense of lightness. The obsession with openness shaped more than architecture. Painters revealed the flat truth of their canvases. Playwrights revealed the mechanics of storytelling by breaking the fourth wall, visible stage machinery, and fragmented narratives. Fashion celebrated the body instead of concealing it, and new attitudes towards sex demanded frankness and honesty. Across art, design, and life, modern culture sought to confront what had long been hidden and bring it into view. Le Corbusier, one of modernism's most influential figures, famously imagined a house as a machine for living in, and he hoped that cities could be designed with the same logic. Every street, tower, and park carefully aligned, nothing left to chance or the whims of developers. Thus, he created his unrealized urban master plan, the Radiant City. Men will master the forces of nature. They will become themselves architects of symptoms, manufacturers of worlds. Man will then be perfect. He will be a creator. He will therefore be what the vulgar worship as a god. One of the central problems of urban utopias lies in their faith in architectural determinism, the belief that spatial order can directly produce social order. Cities, however, are not fully deterministic machines. They operate through rules, but their outcomes emerge unpredictably from millions of local interactions. Yet, Le Corbusier insisted that only architecture and city planning can provide the exact prescription for the ills of contemporary society. Chaos theory shows that highly complex behavior can arise from very simple constraints, but only when systems are allowed to react, adapt, and evolve. Small local changes must be able to influence the system as a whole through feedback. In such systems, planners may define initial rules or limits, but they cannot control outcomes. And unpredictability is not a failure, but a fundamental feature of complexity. Le Corbusier began from a related, but crucially different assumption. He believed cities appeared chaotic because they lacked rational order, and that by imposing universal rules, geometry, zoning, and circulation, urban life would naturally organize itself into a harmonious whole. This is where the radiant city fails. In real complex systems, unpredictability signals adaptation, evidence that the system is responding to local conditions. In the radiant city, however, Le Corbusier attempted to control not only the spatial framework, but also the social outcomes. Human behavior that deviated from the plan was treated as error rather than feedback. As a result, the radiant city systematically removed the conditions under which complexity can emerge. Strict zoning eliminated mixed-use streets and chance encounters. Functional separation weakened social interaction. Large superblocks disrupted dense street networks, while standardized housing suppressed variation and local adaptation. Together, these decisions reduced feedback between different parts of the city, preventing small-scale behaviors from shaping the urban whole. In systems terms, the city became over-constrained, locked into a rigid, stable configuration rather than allowed to evolve. Le Corbusier assumed that simplified spatial rules would produce stable and predictable social outcomes, a form of closed, top-down determinism. By contrast, real complex systems, such as ecosystems, traffic networks, or markets, operate through fixed constraints but generate unpredictable patterns because they remain open to feedback and continual adjustment. Cities share these properties. Urban order emerges socially and statistically, not through strict geometric control. As Jane Jacobs famously argued, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody, only when they are created by everybody. A position that aligns closely with complexity theory's emphasis on feedback, adaptation, and collective action. Corbusier's radiant city rejected the messy European city, replacing it with uniform towers and wide open spaces. The result: reduced social interaction, erased historic fabric, and car-focused layouts. The radiant city seems to be an antisocial environment for human insects, with no sidewalks, no casual meeting spaces. But Frank Kafka's Poor Gregor Samsa reminds us that being an insect, living within a machine, isn't nearly as glamorous as it sounds. In practice, similar large-scale projects sometimes led to poverty, crime, and social breakdown. Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, USA was built in the 1950s as a large modernist housing project with uniform towers and standardized layouts. It was intended to provide affordable, efficient housing. However, over time, it suffered from poor maintenance, social isolation, and concentrated poverty. By the 1970s, crime and vandalism were rampant, and the complex became infamous as a failure of large-scale modernist planning. It was partially demolished 21 years after winning an award from the American Institute of Architects. Architectural theorist Charles Jencks famously said that modern architecture died on the 15th of July, 1972 at 3:32 p.m., the moment the housing complex was demolished. Jencks saw this event not just as a building being blown up, but as a symbolic birth of postmodernism, which embraced complexity, history, and diversity over rigid modernist principles. The same challenge appears in Skyscrapers. Modernist high-rises intended as symbols of progress and order. Urban historian Lewis Mumford admired Sullivan's artistry, but he argued that skyscrapers, no matter how beautifully designed, often intensified economic centralization and inequality. Where Sullivan saw them as democratic, Mumford warned they could become monuments to finance capitalism rather than everyday life. If the function of a building is profit and power, then skyscrapers maximize these by stacking rentable units on the same plot of expensive land and scaling infinitely upwards. The more floors you add, the more units you can rent or sell. Even in movies, skyscrapers symbolize climbing the corporate ladder. Within a single city, skyscrapers compete for height, visibility, and iconic form, each tower trying to outdo the others. The result is a skyline assembled through market logic rather than urban design, where the spaces between buildings are treated as leftover zones instead of meaningful public places. Over time, this rivalry has extended between cities, turning skylines into markers of economic strength and prestige, functioning like giant logos. Globally, modernist skyscrapers often rise right beside slums, exposing the social and economic costs of top-down planning. Here, form follows function means profit, power, and prestige, continuing Western modernism's focus on order and efficiency, serving corporate goals. In South Mumbai, the Bandra Kurla complex towers over Dharavi, highlighting extreme inequality. In Hong Kong, sleek skyscrapers rise above crowded urban villages like Sham Shui Po, showing the stark contrasts between the profit-driven towers and low-income housing. Rio's high-rises overlook favelas like Rusinia and Vidigal, leaving informal settlements squeezed into leftover spaces. In Lagos, glass and steel towers neighbor slums like Makoko, showing social and spatial segregation. Manila skyscrapers overlook payatas, where communities are excluded from planning. Many more examples exist worldwide. These buildings don't just tower over slums. They reshape the environment. They create wind tunnels, cast long shadows, increase heat in streets, replace green spaces, and strain water, energy, and drainage systems. By concentrating wealth for the few, they make life harder for the many. Across continents, the pattern repeats. Walter Gropius emerged as another key figure reacting to the Industrial Revolution, pioneering a radical vision to unify art, craft, and science in design. In 1919, Gropius founded the Bauhaus, 6 months after World War I, an art, design, and architectural school famous for its experimental approach. He asserted that true creative work can be done only by the man whose knowledge and mastery of the physical laws of statics, dynamics, optics, acoustics, equip him to give life and shape to his inner vision. In a work of art, the laws of the physical world, the intellectual world, and the world of the spirit function and are expressed simultaneously. His aim was a unification of the arts through craft. No longer can anything exist in isolation. He believed that all aspects of design, social, visual, technical, and economic, are connected, and that creativity comes from balancing these opposing forces. Gropius's own buildings translated Bauhaus principles into built form. The Fagus factory pioneered the glass curtain wall, expressing transparency, lightness, and the dignity of industrial labor, earning him praise from Mies van der Rohe and establishing him as a leading European architect. The Bauhaus building in Dessau became the school's architectural manifesto, modular, rational, flooded with light, and organized around function while encouraging collective life. Later, the masters' houses explored standardized forms combined with individual variation, reflecting Gropius's belief that unity and diversity could coexist. True design, he said, is not a rigid system, but an open, evolving process. The Bauhaus curriculum combined a diverse range of social and educational backgrounds in the study of materials, color theory, and formal relationships. These preliminary courses were often taught by visual artists including Paul Klee, Wassily Kandinsky, Feininger, Moholy Nagy, Oskar Schlemmer, and Joseph Albers, alongside craft courses combining imagination with practical skills to liberate originality. The Bauhaus shut down in 1933 by its own leadership under pressure from the Nazi regime, which labeled it a hub of communist ideas, even though Bauhaus didn't have any political orientation. They were reformists whose program was based on the needs of the people instead of luxury needs. Even though the Bauhaus school existed for only 14 years, it started a powerful movement that would alter the course of art history. For much of its early history, the Bauhaus didn't formally teach architecture. Its strongest output was from workshops, carpentry, metal, textiles. Many iconic Bauhaus objects were mass-produced and widely seen. So when people think Bauhaus, they often picture furniture design, brewers' tubular steel chairs, product design, clean typography, graphic design, everyday objects, minimalist lamps, geometric posters, craft plus workshop culture, more than buildings. Even though the school built relatively few buildings itself, Bauhaus ideas shaped the international style and functionalist aesthetics. Walter Gropius and Mies van der Rohe exported Bauhaus ideas globally, especially to the US. Yet, when exported to the US, these ideals were adapted to the realities of the market. Gropius and Mies van der Rohe designed universities, corporate offices, and luxury homes. Mies in particular, who became associated with the emerging corporate culture of mid-century America, created skyscrapers like the Seagram building, arguably the most influential skyscraper ever built. Lakeshore Drive apartments, two minimalist glass and steel apartment towers that became icons of modernist architecture and helped define the international style. Yet, reducing Mies to corporate modernism misses something essential. Outside the skyscraper, his work often achieved the very clarity, calm, and human resonance that modernism promised. In smaller scale institutional and cultural projects, Mies's ideals were not absorbed by market forces, but allowed to unfold more fully. These buildings reveal the tension at the heart of modernism. The same principles could produce either corporate monumentality or deeply humane spaces, depending on who they served and how they were applied. Farnsworth House, a glass box in nature. Neue Nationalgalerie, Berlin, an iconic museum, monumental yet minimal. Lafayette Park in Detroit, a rare example of modernist urban housing that actually works well for residents. These works reveal something crucial. Modernism in architecture is not all inherently bad, and modernism itself was never really the problem. The problems arose when its principles were reduced to efficiency, control, and profit. Where it listened to people and context, it often produced incredible spaces. Think Falling Water, a modernist house built over a waterfall, deeply connected to nature. Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier, a light floating house with ribbon windows and open plan. Calm, elegant, almost like a sculpture you can live in. Or the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. Minimal, serene, beautifully proportioned. And Salk Institute by Louis Kahn. Modernist, monumental, but deeply human. A place for reflection. These spaces are human-scaled, thoughtfully integrated with their surroundings, and full of light, material, and geometric play. They invite us to move, linger, and experience them, creating a poetic, personal connection that skyscrapers rarely achieve. Modern society often rewards the pursuit of wealth, but blaming greed or architects doesn't solve the problem. Greed is systemic, not individual, and architects don't control the conditions for production. Sullivan and Wright shaped the foundations of modern architecture. Gropius and Mies transformed those ideas into the international style. All believed technology could liberate people from hard labor and create spaces for creativity and community. The issue is less about bad intentions and more about unintended consequences. But now we know. Centralized planning reduced democratic input. So the question is no longer whether form should follow function, but what we mean by function. Instead of serving economic goals alone, could architecture follow nature's adaptive logic? Could function include climate, landscape, ecosystems, and social patterns? Thermal performance, daylight, shading, passive heating and cooling, water management, vegetation, and long-term resilience are no longer secondary concerns. They are architectural fundamentals. If we return to Darwin's idea that form evolves to survive, architecture becomes less a static machine and more a living system, an organism, one whose skin, geometry, and materials emerge from environmental logic rather than stylistic preference. In this sense, beauty in nature is not decorative, but functional. And perhaps this is why architecture can never be pure beauty. It is inherently useful, bound to human purpose and inseparable from its environment.